of the water element. And so that water element appears most distinctly in, here are the fluids of the body: bile, phlegm, pus, blood, sweat, fat, tears, grease, spittle, snot, the oil of the joints, urine, or whatever else pertaining to oneself is water, watery, and clung to. So this is the internal water element, and then one contemplates that this internal water element and the external water element are simply water element. So here I have the cup, legendary cup of herbal tea. Notice. So now, what is it? Yeah, external water element. What is it now? Okay, then there are times when the internal water element puts a little pressure on the bladder, and then sooner or later it becomes external water element. Okay, so then one contemplates it with proper wisdom, as it really is. This is not mine. This I am not. This is not myself. One becomes disenchanted with the water element and dispassionate towards the water element. Then the fire element, the distinctive characteristic of the fire element is heat, warmth. Okay, and so this needs a little explanation. Whatever internally belonging to oneself is fire, fiery, and clung to, that is that by which one is warmed. Okay, that's obvious. Ages. Now, according to the Indian physiology, it's the heat in the body that causes the body to age. So, if you freeze something, like you freeze meat, it doesn't decay. If you take it out and keep it in the warmth, then in the heat, then it will decay. Similarly, with fruit, you put fruit in the refrigerator, it stays. You leave it out, it ripens, and then it gets overripe and decays. So that by which one is warmed, ages, and consumed, and that by which what is eaten and so forth gets completely digested. So this is the heat element, again according to the Indian physiology, is what is responsible for digestion. And similarly, one contemplates the external fire element, the internal fire element, the heat of the body, the external fire element, the heat of the sun, the warmth of the weather, as simply fire element, and becomes detached from it. Okay, then the air element here is simply described as whatever is air, airy and clung to, but the commentaries explain the air element because the air is manifest through the wind which blows, and so we see the air element most distinctly in motion, especially expansion and contraction, or in distension is expansion. Okay, so what is the internal air element? Again, some of this explanation depends on the ancient Indian physiology. So the upgoing winds, the downgoing winds, these would be what we would now call, I would think, what we would now call the nerve currents. Any doctor in the house? Biologist? There's the sensory nerve current and the motor nerve current. So the sensory would be the nerve current through which sensory data gets transmitted to the brain. And then the motor nerve current would be the nerve current by which thoughts originating in the mind get transformed into bodily activity. Okay, then there's winds in the belly, winds in the bowels, winds that course through the limbs, and then most distinctly we see the air element in respiration, in-breathing and out-breathing. And then internal air element, external air element are simply the air element. One becomes the other. I breathe in the air, and then the oxygen in the air becomes assimilated to my body, and the carbon dioxide that's rejected by the cells gets exhaled and becomes part of the atmosphere. And so in this way, one contemplates all of this as being not mine, not I, not myself, and becomes detached from the air element. Okay, then we come to the space element, which in the Abhidhamma system is considered a type of secondary matter, derivative matter. And in the suttas, the Pali tradition, the space element is not considered what I call the all-comprehending space or the absolute space, but rather it is considered spaces that are not occupied by other material substances. So what is the internal space element? So whatever belonging to oneself is space, spatial, and clung to. That is the holes of the ears, the nostrils, the opening of the mouth, and then that aperture whereby what is eaten, drunk, consumed, and tasted gets swallowed. I think that's called the esophagus or the gullet. And then where it collects, that would be the space within the stomach. And then where it is, whereby it is excreted from below, that would be the open space of the intestines and the intestines, the anus. What is below the rectum, I'm sorry. Rectum. Okay, so the internal space, external space are simply the space element, again to be contemplated, not mine, not I, not myself. Okay, now we come to what is new in the sutta, and that is the consciousness element. And here the text speaks about the consciousness element as being purified and bright. And according to the commentary, I have a note here that the commentary explains it as the consciousness that accomplishes the work of insight contemplation on the elements. I'm not so sure that I agree with that. It seems to me, because this description, purified and bright, parisudang, pariyodatang, would be a distinctive, it seems that this is describing the consciousness, I would say, of the fourth jhana. Of course, the consciousness element includes all consciousness, but that consciousness which becomes purified and bright would be the consciousness which has now been purified through the four jhanas, and maybe now it's being directed to the work of insight contemplation. Okay, so now the text goes on and says, what does one cognize? So what does one know with that consciousness? And often when the Buddha is explaining the aggregate of consciousness, he'll explain it in terms of the 6 kinds of consciousness. That is eye consciousness, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind consciousness. Each of these consciousnesses knows its own distinctive object. So the eye knows forms, the ear knows sounds, the mind knows dhammas, mental objects. But here, the Buddha is explaining just in terms of feelings. I think the reason is that he is trying to direct, I would say, maybe because he's sketching okay, let me go backtrack. Maybe he's trying to build up again to the consciousness of the 4th jhana, and then seeing what paths lie ahead for the practitioner when one has mastered the 4th jhana. Okay, so let's take a careful look at this passage. Okay, so what does one cognize? What does one know with that consciousness? So one knows, and the sutta just in the Pali just expresses it with each object of knowledge with one word. So one knows pleasant, one knows pain, one knows neither pain nor pleasure. And so one is knowing, feeling. And this seems to be here almost inserting into this passage one of the exercises in the Satipatthana system of meditation, that is the contemplation of feeling. Because when contemplation of feeling, how does the contemplation of feeling develop? If we just look at Sutta number 10, contemplation of feeling is on page 149. So when feeling a pleasant feeling, one understands, I feel a pleasant feeling. When feeling a painful feeling, one understands, I feel a painful feeling. When feeling a feeling that's neither painful nor pleasant, one understands, I feel a neither painful nor pleasant feeling. So here we have almost spliced in a brief reference to the contemplation of feeling. Then, when one feels a pleasant feeling, one understands, I feel a pleasant feeling. And then the understanding goes on with the cessation. I'm sorry, I've jumped the gun. In dependence on a contact to be felt as pleasant, there arises a pleasant feeling. When one feels a pleasant feeling, one understands, I feel a pleasant feeling. One understands with the cessation of that contact to be felt as pleasant, its corresponding feeling, that is, the pleasant feeling that arose in dependence on that contact, that feeling ceases and subsides. So in that very brief statement, what can we see sort of entailed? What other teachings entailed here? I see 2 of them. Yeah, impermanence is one. There's another. Exactly. Very good. So we got both of them, each with one shot. So we have dependent arising, because in dependence on contact, there arises feeling. And then with the cessation of that contact, then the feeling that arises based on it ceases. So there we have both the cessation aspect of dependent origination and, because it's cessation, impermanence. This is a very nice jasmine tea. Oolong, but it has a jasmine-like flavor. Of jasmine. You see, when there's a pleasant contact, pleasant feeling arises. With the cessation of contact, that pleasant feeling ceases. Okay, in dependence on a contact to be felt as painful, there arises a painful feeling. Okay, this is just applies the same thing to the painful feeling and then to the neither painful nor pleasant feeling. We don't have to repeat the full passage. Okay, now the Buddha illustrates this after the section on neither painful nor pleasant feeling. He says, just as from the contact and friction of two fire sticks, heat is generated and fire is produced, and with the separation of those two fire sticks, the heat ceases and subsides. So in dependence on a contact to be felt as pleasant, painful, neutral, there arises, respectively, a pleasant, painful, neutral feeling. And so what makes the contact here, the way I see it, it's not the sense, it's not just the sense faculty and the sense object, but in the contact there's actually three factors involved. In the fire sticks there's only two. But maybe actually you could say the three in the fire sticks, maybe. Anybody have experience with fire sticks? We're too modern. Okay, you have the lower fire stick, the upper fire stick, then you rub them together. And that produces the heat. So in the case of contact, you have sense object, sense organ or sense faculty, and then the mind has to make contact with the object through the sense faculty. So when those three come together, that is contact, and from that contact there arises the feeling. Okay, so one understands with the cessation of that same contact to be felt as neither painful nor pleasant, its corresponding feeling ceases and subsides. Okay, now the text says, then there remains only equanimity, purified and bright, malleable, wieldy, and radiant. Okay, here the commentary identifies this. This is what I would think identifies this equanimity with the equanimity of the fourth jhana, which Pukkusāti had already attained, according to the commentary. And now the Buddha describes this equanimity as purified and bright, parisudang, pariodatang, it's malleable. I think this would be mudung, wieldy, kamanyang, and radiant, pabasarang. So this would be the mind, the equanimity present in the mind of the fourth jhana. And again the Buddha, in order to praise this equanimity, he uses a simile, the simile of gold. So we have a skilled goldsmith is preparing a furnace, heats it up, he takes some gold and that he wants to refine, he puts it into the crucible, then from time to time he blows on it, from time to time sprinkles water over it, from time to time just looks on, and in this way that gold becomes refined, well refined, completely refined, faultless, rid of the impurities, malleable, wieldy, and radiant. There's a kind of intersection here with another sutta that occurs in the Anguttara Nikaya, the Book of Threes. Different numbering systems. I think I have it as sutta number 99 in the Book of Threes, but the Pali Text Society had slightly different numbering. I think it came out to be, maybe in my Anguttara, maybe it was 100. But it uses the simile of a goldsmith refining gold to illustrate how a meditator refines the mind. And blowing on the gold with the fan is like applying energy when it's time to apply energy. Sprinkling water over the gold is like when it's time to relax the exertion and then to focus the mind, or let the mind just settle down and become quiet, more quiet. Because the sprinkling water over the gold tempers the heat, and so turning the mind towards samadhi helps to settle down any kind of agitation or restlessness brought on by that effort. And then when everything is in balance and the process of cultivation is going smoothly, then one just looks on with equanimity. So that is like the goldsmith looks on at the gold as the refining process is taking place. Okay, then whatever kind of ornament that goldsmith might want to make from that gold, a chain, earrings, necklace, and so forth, he'll be able to do so. The sutta that I referred to from the Anguttara Nikaya then explains how when the mind has been cultivated through the balance of these three qualities, energy, stillness or concentration, and equanimity, then one can develop the 6 superpowers, that is the 5 mundane superpowers like psychic powers, or the ability to read the minds of others, the divine ear, the recollection of past lives, and the knowledge, that's the ability to see the passing away and rebirth of others. And then the 6th is the world transcending superpower, that is the power of liberation. Okay, so now the Buddha continues. He says, okay, after the simile, he says, then there remains only this equanimity, or a mind of equanimity, which has been purified and bright, malleable, wieldy, and radiant. Okay, then the meditator understands, if I were to direct this equanimity, remember this is the equanimity now in the 4th jhana, so the question here is, what lies beyond the 4th jhana? What are the possibilities? So one possibility is to continue the process of mental refinement, moving in from the 4th jhana, moving upwards to the arupa attainments, the formless meditative absorptions. So the meditator thinks, if I were to direct this equanimity, purified and bright, to the base of of infinite space, That is the first, the lowest of the four formless meditations. And to develop my mind accordingly, then this equanimity of mind, supported by that base, clinging to it, would remain for a very long time. Let me just read the whole passage, then I'll come back and explain. If I were to direct this equanimity so purified and bright to the base of infinite consciousness, this is the second formless meditative absorption, and to develop my mind accordingly, again, this equanimity of mind would remain for a very long time. If I were to direct this equanimity to the base of nothingness, the third formless meditative absorption, and then to the base of neither perception nor non-perception, the fourth formless meditative absorption, and to develop my mind accordingly, this equanimity of mind supported by that base, clinging to it, would remain for a very long time. Okay, the implication of this first is that to direct that equanimity, okay, start at the bottom, to the base of infinite space and develop the mind accordingly, means that one directs the mind to the base of infinite space, and then one develops the concentration to the point where one can attain that absorption in the base of infinite space. And then by attaining that absorption without going further, then that mind at death will move on to re-arising or rebirth in the sphere of existence called the sphere of the infinity of space, which is the lowest of the four formless spheres of existence. And dwelling there, it might abide or remain for a very long time, because it's said that the lifespan of the beings in that realm, it's 20, 40, 60, said to be like 20,000 great kalpas, great kalpas, great aeons. So it's inconceivable long time. And similarly, if one develops the base of infinite consciousness, even longer. If one develops the base of nothingness, the lifespan in the sphere of a plane of nothingness, even longer. If one develops the base of neither perception nor non-perception, without going further, then when rebirth occurs, the mind re-arises in the sphere or plane of neither perception nor non-perception, and remains there for some 80,000, 84,000 great aeons, mahakalpas. But notice the expression that describes each of these bases, that it's said that the Pali uses the expression tung nisita tad upadana. So nisita is dependent upon. So the mind is dependent upon that attainment. And tad upadana, upadana is clinging, but it also suggests the idea of a sustenance is a good rendering. What sustains it? So it's the mind is sustained by that equanimity and dependent upon it. But because it's dependent and because that equanimity is founded upon clinging, it's impermanent. It's, you could say it's defective, it's flawed. And so we have the next paragraph is sort of in a way the key to this whole section of the sutta. So it says that he understands thus, if I were to direct this equanimity so purified and bright to the base of infinite space and to develop my mind accordingly, this would be conditioned. And then similarly, if I were to develop this, to direct this equanimity to the base of infinite consciousness, the base of nothingness, the base of neither perception nor non-perception, this would be conditioned. And then the commentary has a very nice explanation. That word conditioned, in a sense, reveals the whole unsatisfactory nature of these attainments, that because they're conditioned, they are fueled and supported by conditions. And because those conditions are impermanent, it means that these states of attainment and these existence in these planes of rebirth are also impermanent. So the commentary says, this is the note number 1277. It says, this is said in order to show the danger or defect in the immaterial or the formless meditations. By the one phrase, this would be conditioned, he shows, even though the lifespan there, that is in the sphere of infinite space, is 20,000 aeons, that is conditioned, fashioned or fabricated, built up. It is thus impermanent, unstable, not lasting, transient. It is subject to perishing, breaking up, and dissolution. It is involved with birth, aging, and death, grounded upon suffering. It is not a shelter, a place of safety, a refuge. And so having passed away from there as a worldling, one can still be reborn in any of the four states, the bad destinations. And so if one were just to develop those formless absorptions without developing insight wisdom, then one could take rebirth there in those super elevated planes and live for 20,000, 40,000, 80,000 aeons, but eventually the alarm clock goes off. And when the alarm clock rings, then the mind passes away from there and takes rebirth elsewhere. And the cycle of birth and death goes on. And so this is why when the Buddha, before his enlightenment, when he was a seeker of enlightenment, under the first two teachers, he learned how to attain the base of nothingness and how to attain the base of neither perception nor non-perception. But he wasn't satisfied with those because he knew these states are not final, not ultimate. They're conditioned, impermanent, and if I take rebirth through them, that comes to an end and I'm not liberated. Okay, so then the text continues. He does not, so when he understands this, then he does not form, here the Pali, it's so well expressed and so difficult to render into English. So it's very awkward, this attempt to translate. The Pali says, Neva tung abhisankaroti, na abhisanchetayati, bhavayava vibhavayava. So we have the verb abhisankaroti, which suggests putting together, constructing, formulating. So here we have to render it, not form any condition. Then abhisanchetayati, it's an act involving volition. So here we have to render generate any volition. So he does not form any condition or generate any volition for either being, that's continued existence, that is desiring to exist in any of these higher realms of existence, or for non-being, any desire for personal annihilation. But since he doesn't form any condition or generate any volition towards either being or non-being, for either eternal existence or for personal annihilation, he does not cling to anything in the world. And here the verb na upadhyati, does not cling, sort of resonates with the fault in these four attainments, that they are based, that they're supported by that base, clinging to it. So this is sort of the negation of that. So he does not cling to anything in the world. Then when he does not cling, again, there's always these linguistic problems. Na paritasati. Here it's rendered, he is not agitated. But this is a verb, na paritasati. Which brings over resonances, or it merges two verbs which would be quite distinct in Sanskrit, but come together in Pali. One verb suggests craving. This would be in Sanskrit paritrishyate, and the other suggests fear. This would be tasati, paritasati. But in Pali, the two verbs come together, so we have one verb, paritasati, suggesting with two nuances, one suggesting that he doesn't have any more craving, the other doesn't have any more fear. How does one render that in English? We have to say he doesn't. Well, the one word, because these two Sanskrit verbs have sort of become conflated in Pali, suggests two nuances. He does not have craving, does not have fear. So we have to find one word that will render both ideas. What? Apprehension. That tends more towards fear. No, we want to get the negation, does not, or is not. I'm not getting it. Deathless. Feckless. He is not, that would sound a little strange. Feckless. Anyway, I went for it, he is not agitated. Which, I mean, it's not satisfactory, but it's very hard to come up with a solution. Okay, so when he is not agitated, then we have next a verb, parinibhayati, which we have to render with a substantive English word, you see. So he attains nibbana as though it's some kind of substantial thing that he attains. But in Pali, it's just indicated with a verb. So parinibhayati, he is, if you want to translate very literally, you would say he is nirvanized. You see, it's not so easy to translate these passages. No, even, it's not a matter of how long it takes, but it's just that we don't have, either satisfactory words or, say, Pali can suggest with verbs things that we have to render with a verb and a noun. Okay, then he understands birth is destroyed, or let's say birth is finished, that's better. That the cycle of births, rebirths is finished. The holy life has been lived. What had to be done has been done. There is no more coming back to any state of being. Even if that's problematic, na parangita tayati, that no more, literally it's no more for thisness. Okay, I didn't leave time for questions, but we'll come back, we'll break for the lunch, and then we can come back and have some questions and discussion. You see, it's a very rich sutta. And then the last part is very beautiful, but we'll have to take it next week. Okay, we do the sharing of the merits. It's been so long since I've done a class that I'm forgetting. What do I do? Okay, so we end with the sharing.